Begun. Welcome to session 3 of the Turn It On Google Educator series, which we are delivering in conjunction with Google as a Google partner. We are hosting these sessions to achieve two things, really. One is to make you aware of the potential of Google Workspace and what you can use it for. The other is to prepare you for undertaking the Google Educator Level 1. If you want to do that exam, then this series of 7 webinars will put you in the best place to do that. But if you want to, you need to apply to Google directly. It will be a fee of £10 to undertake that examination. And if successful, you'll get the Google Educator Level 1 accreditation at the end of it. If you think it's something you're really interested in, you can always continue on and undertake Google Educator Level 2. So today we are going to focus on some more elements of the requirements to become a Google Educator Level 1. This is part, as I said, of a series, so we will still move on to look at how we are going to look at in delivering an engaging classroom. So next time will be mainly focused on Google Classroom, then about building that sort of immersive learning environment online and making it as engaging as possible for pupils and students. So we've got plenty of sessions to go, but today, to bring it back to what we're doing, we're going to look at a selection of digital tools, and really it's around personal organization, and that's either personal organization of you as a teacher, but it could also be the personal organization of the pupils and the students you're working with. So that is very much dual purpose. And as we go through today, you'll see how I ping backwards and forwards between those elements to show you how some of the tools that you've got available to you can be used for those purposes. The units that we're focusing on in today's session are mainly the units 5 and unit 6. And I've tried to direct as much as possible to where those different applications will focus. And you'll see when we get to the slides, I've broadly told you which one of those units you will get addressed in the Educator Level 1 examination. But that's not to say that they exclusively pigeonhole themselves in that unit only. And as you'll see later on in the 4 sessions we've got left, it will appear that things like Google Meet will come up in other aspects, such as Google Classroom session we're going to look at next time. Because as with everything in Google Workspace, it's more of a holistic experience and a set of tools that can be taken and used in many different contexts or will appear in other Google apps. So the first thing we're going to have a look at today is what we will do with Google Meet. But before we do that, I just wanted to get your input, and you can pop this into the chat for me. And that's how you're using Google Drive for your own personal organization. Are you keeping resources in there at a personal, professional level? Do you know if it's being used whole school with Google Shared Drives? Just how is that being used at the moment to drive the personal organization of resources that you might depend upon on a daily basis? Now, they could be teaching and learning resources. They might be more whole school resources, so you might have a whole school shared drive. It's really just getting an idea of how they're being used. So if there's anything you're doing with them currently, pop it into the chat and I'll pick it up from there. If there isn't at this point in time, then I will simply keep moving and we'll branch out into the next part of the presentation. Thank you for popping that in there. I can see from what you said, it seems to be your go-to, and that, as it is with a lot of schools, teachers find it really useful just to have their planning on tap from anywhere at any time. And that's one of the beautiful things about using Google Drive or shared drives. You just need a device with an internet connection and a web browser. It doesn't even have to be Google Chrome, although Google Chrome browser is best. You can jump on and just go to Google and log in, and there's everything you need. And then all of the apps to edit them are there as tabs in a web browser. So again, the benefit is if you're not using a Chromebook, you could use a Windows device, you could use an Apple device, but you don't have to have that specific software installed, which is so beneficial, I find. I'm just not dependent upon anymore having a particular application or a piece of software installed. In the Drive, it will instantly link with that in the Google ecosystem. And I can see there from the comment that you're going to keep you every day as well. So it's just keep is something we'll come on to in this session, but I often find, I think, in all honesty, that although Google Drive is there, it branches so nicely to all the other Google apps, and there's certain favorites that I'll have that I will use absolutely all the time, but there's others I may not use quite so frequently. But when I go to them, I realise just how beneficial they are. And although I might lean on them only once or twice a year, it's reassuring to know they're there. But also, I think the other thing that I often find is when going to Google training sessions or working with other Google educators, is that I discover other ways of using an application that I hadn't conceived previously, and that's hopefully something you're going to get from joining these sessions, and that you can find new ways of using technology that you've got to hand. So if we come back to Google Meet, which we're using now for this very session, it's such a powerful tool, and it's got a lot of scope about the things that you can use it for. Google Meet's gone under a little bit of a transition with the new Google Workspace tiers, and we'll touch upon the new Google Workspace tiers at the end of this session. But it can be used in so many different ways, whether it's meeting between staff or having a governors meeting, as we're moving at the moment, transitioning back to a little bit more distance between getting as many adults or students and pupils together in a classroom. Or it might be that you're using it for meeting with parents. So I know that recently quite a few schools have been having open evenings, particularly in secondary scenarios. And some of those have told me that they've chosen to go back to more of a remote situation where they've used Google Meet as a platform to invite parents in and speak to them using the technology that's available, so that it avoids having them all in a hall. So whichever way you want to do it, whether you're delivering distance learning, whether you've got a bubble that's gone down and they've gone back out again because you've reached the 5% threshold in the UK, or whether you're just blending what you're doing and taking some of the good practice that you developed during lockdown and then you're bringing it back in the school or into the classroom. Something really simple and effective I saw this week, I was in a primary school, and the head just said, you know what, we made a decision, it's a good idea for being COVID secure. We're not going to get everybody together in the hall anymore, but for the next few weeks running up to the Christmas break, what we'll do is we'll use Google Meet, and everybody in the classrooms can have it on their board, and I can just speak to everybody as if they were with me in the hall, but I can get to them and still have that personal touch as a head teacher, share videos, resources. They can see me, but also they can interact back as well through the teacher. So it still allows the school to function, and this technology is so beneficial to do that, but also helps just to keep things as normal as possible for the pupils and students. It does also give you some degree of what people can do while they're in your Google Meet, and also who can actually come in the first place. And all of those are settings that either can be defined by default in policies in Google Admin Center, which your IT technician may administrate for you, or you might have access to, or that you can then achieve through the Google Meeting itself. With Google Meet, it's in the questions that you're going to get for the Google Level 1 examination. I think a lot of the areas that are covered in there, we are going to be very competent with as educators, because we've been forced to use it so readily during the last 18 months. So you'll be asked if you know how to set up a Google Meet, and that'll be in the calendar, and we'll have a look at calendar next because that does dovetail together. But then once you're in a Google Meet, it's how to use the functions in the Google Meets that you've got along the bottom. So very quickly, because we've used other platforms as well, we recognize common symbols such as how to turn cameras and microphones on and off. But not everyone realizes there are features such as the closed captions, which are the two C's on the bar at the bottom, which uses machine learning, and it will interpret pretty fluently and accurately what you're saying at the same time. So if I switch that on for me, that's going to come up on the bottom of my screen, and it's going to record quite nicely what's going on with my language. The other way is to let people know that you want to interact with them. So putting a hand up, as you'll be able to see now, I've got my hand up. It would let anybody else know that we're running the meeting, rather than me butting in, jumping across the top of a sentence or something they're saying. Wait patiently, and whether I'm a pupil in a lesson or whether I'm not, other people can also put hands down as well. So if that's over, you can say to that person, look, I can see you've contributed, I'm going to put your hand down for you, or and manage it that way. The three dots which come next to the share screen tray is where you will find a multitude of other options in there, where if you've got Google Chrome in your school or Chromecast, you can broadcast to a Android board. And I know a lot of boards and TVs now have an Android operating system embedded. So that allows you to Chromecast really conveniently from a device and get what's on your device to the front of the classroom. It's quite beneficial. You can also use Jamboard if you use that for whiteboard capabilities. And we'll look at Jamboard later on in another session. You can organize or reorganize the tiles in your window by the change layout or go full screen. A visual effects is quite useful. I expect many of us have used it, and that's to apply different backgrounds. You could also have phone audio included with Google Meets. If you've got an issue, there's a report problem button. But at the same time, under settings, it will allow you to go in and determine if you've got an external microphone attached to your computer, for instance, because you want clarity of speech. Then you can change from the internal microphone on the device that you're using to use external microphones as well. So there's lots of options for you to control that meeting. But just to pop back to the left of those three dots, the presentation tray gives you the ability to just select a tab. So as it currently is, I'm just selecting the tab where I have the Google Slides open for this training session. Or you could have the entire application. So I might have my Chrome browsers we'll do in a moment. Or I could show the entire desktop, but be aware if you're going to start to use anything beyond the single tab. But just for safeguarding reasons, also to protect you as a professional, that you need to make sure that whatever you've got open on your computer is suitable to be seen by others and is not going to put you in a compromised position or affect anyone else. So just be very, very sure before you share an entire window of Google Chrome or your entire desktop that absolutely everything that should be seen is suitable and it's not going to cause a problem with anything you're doing in school. So Google Meet, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. And the fact that with Google Meet, you can make sure that you've got a tool to get to others, but it allows you to work at a distance, but still work as effectively, whether it's a one-to-one meeting with a pupil. And we always advise, from safeguarding reasons, if you are going to have a one-to-one meeting with people, to have another member of staff there, just to make sure, like you would have a one-to-one physical discussion with a pupil, you would always be very careful about that. And the safeguarding will also think about that same safety online in an online scenario. But there's the beauty built in that we haven't all got amazing broadband at home from wherever we're working, and we might not be as fortunate as we are in school to have a very fast connection. So that what Google Meet can do, if you leave it on automatic, it can manage the quality of the call. And if it needs to, you can, in Google Admin Center, apply certain settings to cut down bandwidth. You can also have things such as policies where you start meetings without cameras on. That's because that's good practice and you don't want anybody to share something over a camera they shouldn't. But at the same time, if you have got others there that are joining from a poor broadband connection, it will help with their connection just to start with audio, or have both muted as a protocol, and then for them to put on the audio. Certainly from a class management perspective, I don't encourage my pupils that I'm working with to all put their cameras on for many reasons. I can't control what's going on in the background on their links, but also it ends up being a distraction for other people that I'm working with, or they may make inappropriate things happen on camera that you don't want happening inside of a Google Meet. So do think about all those scenarios, and those sorts of questions could come up in Unit 6 when you're undertaking the Google Educator exam. So I'm not going to labor too much more on Google Meet because we all should be quite familiar with it. I'm just going to pop over to Google Calendar. I think at this point I am going to swap over what I'm presenting, and I'm going to share my entire window. So if I just share my entire Google Chrome, and then with Google Calendar, once it syncs up, here I've got the meeting that we're using this afternoon. So if you want to set up a Google Meet, you can spawn a Google Meet spontaneously. So if you open up Google Meet as one of your apps from in here, you can have it as a spontaneous session if you want, or you can join something that's already in your calendar. And again, I'm not going to labor this too much because I'm acutely aware that we're all really familiar with Google Calendar. But if you didn't want to have a calendared event, you can just go to Start New Meeting and choose who you want to invite in. You can have additional settings applied in the admin center to stop meetings taking place between pupils and pupils without an adult being present. You can also set it if you wanted to have it just for Google Meet to be used between staff, that it's not something that pupils can use. But I'd urge you to think about how detrimental that could be and what you're missing out on from a learning perspective and enriching the learning opportunities through there. Let me pop back over to Calendar. So Calendar is very, very straightforward. You can see that you've got events there. And if you want to join them, you can click on them. And that's where you would have joined Meet today. You can set up new meetings. So there's a parents' evening scenario. If let's get rid of that. I want to delete that so I can get rid of that. I might have parents' evening later. So I'm going to say that I've got my parents' evening. And rather than that being something that I can edit from smaller, I'm going to edit it in full options mode. So I'm going to say that my parents' evening is not going to be a repeating event, but I do want to give it a title. And rather than it being a single event, such as what we're attending here, I am going to say that it's going to be slightly longer than it's given me this 1 hour default. We are going to offer parents the ability to join in slots. So you could have it so that it's one single meeting such as this and parents drop in and out, and there are other platforms you can use, but that would be problematic in the fact that you are going to have to hope you've concluded with the previous parent and that parent's going to be off the call before the next parent jumps in, and for many reasons that would be a logistical absolute nightmare. So instead of having it set up that way, if I get rid of it, you could set it up an alternative way and you could have appointment slots. So we'll go parents evening again, and you can select appointment slots over there. You can say how long you'd like each slot to be. So you can either move it up and down using the cursor, or you can just over type. We've got a time there and it's not quite long enough, so I'm going to give myself an hour and a half. But now what I've set myself up as is having 10-minute slots for parents to choose. So if I save that, what I could do is I could go to the appointments page for that calendar and it opens up. And then what I can have are people that will pick their slots throughout that time period, and I'll know which parent I'm seeing at a certain time. So what it would look like for them, I'm booking a parents' evening slot with me. They've got 6:20 to 6:30, where it's going to be online. And a description is going to be my meeting about John Smith, who's their child, and I'm going to save that. And then all of a sudden in there, I know that that slot's taken, and I can meet with that parent in their ring fence slot. So there's lots of different ways of using calendars, and that would spawn a Meet. And as I was saying earlier, Meet doesn't not discreetly sit on its own. It branches out to Calendar, Google Classroom, and it's got lots of other apps it can link with as well. But if you are using Calendar, that's certainly one way to change the use of your calendar. And instead of having those big meetings, you've got your individual slots there at the same time. Now, I'm not going to labor a lot more about Calendar. There's different ways that you can change the way it's viewed, and you can choose which days of the week are your main working days. You can have calendars that this is by default in Google Drive, a personal calendar, but you can get other people's calendars, so you can search and you can bring them in and people can give you permissions to either view only or add in events. There are ways also, we won't cover it today, to set up whole school calendars and then have those shared as well. And if you're using things like Google Sites, you can embed that whole school calendar in the Google site as well. So there's an awful lot of scope, but just popping back over to the session slides, which I think are there, yeah, they are. In Unit 5 of the Google Educator Level 1 examination, you need to be able to do all the things that we've got on screen. They are fairly straightforward, and most of the time, just through being teachers and being staff using Google Workspace, we've covered an awful lot of that. But you could have a scenario in examination where you're asked to set up, for instance, appointment slots for a parents' evening. So you just need to be confident with how to use all those functions. And you then may get a leading question from the Google Calendar question about Google Meet, or I've seen the reverse of that because it's randomly generated, where you get a Google Meet scenario, and then your Google Meet scenario asks you about, well, if you wanted to not have a spontaneous meet, could you set it up as a calendar event? So there's lots of different things there that you may occur in those two units. If I move through, the next area around communication and organization is using chat. Now, it used to be that there was Hangouts, which combined chat and Meet. And you've got chat, which can exist on its own. So over here, I've got my chats, and to be honest, doesn't look like it's been particularly well used, but I've got spaces there. So there's a whole staff chat. And in there, I can organize the chat between different people. So it might be welcome to the whole school group. Type. Clearly this afternoon I can't. Let's put an E on there. And there. And then I can send that out. But also, as you can see, I've got options in here to use other things sparingly, such as I can use emojis, I can use GIFs to make things a little bit more interesting. I can also upload from my own device. I can, at the same time, bring in things from Google Drive, create a new document on the fly, whether it's a doc, sheets, slides, whatever. I could use that to add a video meeting, and I can then link to a calendar event. So as I was saying, this holistic linking of the apps in the Google Workspace suite are there, or I could just send it as I'm going to there as a message. So you can have it as spaces, or you can have it as a one-to-one chat. So I want to find another person. Let's see if I can find another person. Let's say, no. I know recently I've changed a few users on here, but in theory, in your school, you would search for the other people that are in your Google Workspace, and you'd be able to find them, and you could add them into some private one-to-one chats up there. Or there's communal chats down here in Spaces. So you've got the Google Meet for the video calls, and you've got the chat for more instant messaging types communications. But again, it gives you that ability to just jump on and quickly get files across to people, which in turn complements itself with where we started out, that in Google Drive, of course, you can upload folders and files and send share links from that, or copy links and give them to other people. It might be that you grab that from Google Drive and you share it in here because it's appropriate, and it's something in a shared drive that you just want to direct people to. Maybe it's an updated policy, but there's a lot of scope in here to have community conversations in Spaces and individual conversations with others in chat, or small group conversations in chat. It's something that's got possibilities to use in various different ways. But as far as Unit 6 of the Google Educator Level 1 exam goes, you just need to be able to demonstrate you can use it competently. I would say chat is one of the most straightforward aspects of Google Workspace. So again, I'm not going to labor that too much. So the communication side of things, you need to be able to show that you can organize community meetings or organize yourself using your calendar. You need to show that then you can take advantage of things in Google Meet and Google Chat to just bring people together and demonstrate that you understand the strength of that being in Workspace. Now, I'm absolutely positive you're going to be doing something like that from the work that you're already doing in school, and just the fact that you are working with others, and that by working with others, you're going to have a scenario where you're going to have to use one of those at some point in the day quite frequently. So it's not going to be an unusual scenario that you're going to be picking those up. What's been your experience, is one of the things I was going to ask you, of using online meetings or using online chats? Have you found benefit to it? Any drawbacks? Anything that you think's been a game changer for you? If you could pop it into the chat for me here, I'll refer to those. If you haven't got anything that you want to talk about at the moment, that's absolutely fine. We can keep moving, but I just really would like to get your insight on those aspects: Meet, chat, calendars. How useful have they been for you? Is it something you continued with? Is it something you didn't use before we went into COVID lockdown and you've maybe thrown away your paper planner and moved across? Just how you find those aspects of the Google Workspace. While you're having a think about those, I'm just going to advance to the next slide, just so we've got thoughts focused on where we're going next. And it's something that was a comment in the chat earlier, which was about Google Keep being so useful. I can't underestimate the usefulness of Keep, but we'll come to that in just a moment. An insight in the chat there that where Meet was used during lockdown for different classes. I think that is something that all schools embraced. Sometimes I had schools that, because of home use, they were using other platforms, but it's always better if you could bring the pupils and the staff together in the natural environment that the school uses. And if you've already got Google Workspace, it's a bit of a no-brainer. Why not make sure that those pupils are in a safe environment where they've got an account with the appropriate restrictions? That means that they aren't going to be exposed to things that are a potential safeguarding issue, but still allows them to meet with their peers for things like keeping mental health at the forefront of being able to talk to each other if they want, but not being able to do it behind staff backs, being able to do it in an appropriate forum. Uh, Good. I'm glad the appointment slots are something useful. It's not something that people always know is there, but it's quite a useful way of, if you haven't got a different system for parents' evening appointments, you could use it for that. Or you might be in a professional capacity, line managing a group of staff, and you need to have slots throughout a day that you offer those staff for meetings. So there's lots of different ways that you can use appointment slots, and it's there as a feature. So why not make the most of it? Okay, we'll move on to Google Keep. And I know that Google Keep is also something that you're obviously keen on. Google Keep itself, I think it's seriously underestimated. I use it all day. I'm putting things in there, making notes, but also I find that once I introduce pupils and students to it, certainly from upper key stage 2 and into secondary, it's something they find really useful because they can find that for organization, they may have Google Classroom with their assignments for their homework, but they just want to keep something outside of that. And it might not warrant starting a Google Doc. So Google Keep is this perfect place in between. For the examination itself, there's not a lot that you need to demonstrate you can do with it other than make a Google Keep and then manage them in some way and be able to demonstrate you can put things like media into them. So if I swap over the screen that I'm sharing and we go across to have a look at Google Keep, just jump over that. Just going to swap my screen I'm sharing and reshare with Google Keep. Moving across now. So in here, I've got a demo example of a Google Keep, but the uses are practically endless. And every time I have one of these discussions, I find out more ideas. So whether it's just a to-do list, you use it like a post-it note and you're a member of staff, or you might even be a pupil, you're just somebody who finds it hard to remember what you're doing. Seen plenty of examples where people have found out, oh, that's a good website, or that's a good idea, and you use it for just instantly bookmarking a list of resources. I've seen quite a few teachers get really smart about this, and they've made a spellings list in Google Keep, and then they've used the collaboration button at the bottom, and they've invited pupils in, and then they've given their spellings through Google Keep, or they've given it as a reference there. And it's quite easy, you've seen them, to go back in, and if this was a spellings list, to add another item on that list. I'm just going to close that a minute. You can make things stand out, so you've got all the options there. Let's make that one purple, make it stand out. Also, if you've got visually impaired pupils, I found it really useful to make Google Keep notes stand out from the background, so it makes it easier for them to read because it might support their learning need. You could use it for note taking. I've seen also this used by teachers for reading logs. So instead of having books as reading logs, they ask the pupils to set up a Google Keep note for each book they read, and it then acts as a reading log throughout the year. So as a teacher, you can go back through and you can see the books they read, how much time they spent reading it, and then their feedback or their book reviews after completing that book. So it was another really nice idea I got from a teacher that gave me that one. But pictures and annotations as well. So you can see here, I'm planning a trip to PGL, and I've just used it to remind myself of what I've got to do with getting the letter over to parents and organising payments with the admin office, and then thinking about COVID precautions to have a safe trip. Here I've got one where I'm personally using it to organise my tutor group, but I might have a revision list here as a student. So it could be that I am going to revise something in particular. Let's go in and let's say that we are going to look for a picture. So you could add a picture in using the add image button there. You could archive your note, or you can go to more in here and there's other options, but I could add a picture in and then that picture could be my revision list. Or it might be that I've got, let's say I need to understand how to use adverbs I also need to use how to use nouns, and I need to know where to use full stops. So for me, it's a revision list as a student, and it could be that I use pictorial examples and I break it down even further. But I can have keep notes scattered across my screen that are particularly useful for that week or a piece of work that I'm studying. And if I want to keep something at the top, I can pin a note in so that my pinned notes are there at the top. Now I know that a lot of you use this already, and there's a multitude of ways to do this. And when you start your note at the top, that's where I would choose a list, or I could have a drawing if I've got a Chromebook where I can use a stylus. Or I could have, that's where my image options come in, and then I can pick up my image from there. So there's lots of different ways of doing that. And it's quite a useful way of bringing everything together and having it in one place. Something else you can do, as well as having your notes, is you can set reminders on notes. I haven't got any set up at the moment, but if you wanted, for instance, to say, look, this is what I need to know for the end of the week because I've got some sort of SPAG activity coming up in year 5, and as a pupil I need to be able to demonstrate I know what an adverb and noun and where to use full stops. I could have a reminder on the Thursday that I need to be ready for that on the Friday. If you do archive notes, they will go in here, and any notes that you've deleted will end up in here. And then after 7 days, they take care of themselves, or you can manually empty them out yourself. Such a simple application, but as is with many of these things, the more the simplicity reigns, the better the usefulness. And I certainly find that with Keep as well. Any insights or anything from work you've been using in school? I can see there's a comment here about stuff, and you've been showing them stuff about Keep, paperless desks. Yeah, I would say even for things like being compliant with data protection and GDPR. Once upon a time, I'd have expected to see lots of staff with post-it notes across the bottom of their screens. Well, they don't need to do that any longer. They've got this perfect private place with Google Keep to have all of those. They can have it as a tab in their browser, and they just flick to it. And if they need to add something on, or they need to strike it off by ticking a box, then it all takes care of itself then. And they need to throw that post-it away. They're not throwing it in a bin where somebody could fish it out and read what they've written on it. It's going to end up in their own personal trash, or they can archive it for later. So it's so many more benefits than working in a paper environment. And the Keep is one of those things that I'm almost an evangelist about, because I think it's such a game changer in the way that it works and the way that it allows people to organize and keep information. Any other comments on Keep before I swap over and move on to the next thing? I'm going to switch back to presentation. So Keep is really straightforward. In the examination, I've never heard of anybody in the level 1 educator examination that couldn't show a really good use of Keep and certainly fulfill any question that's being asked. Another one is Google Tasks. I tend to use Google Tasks less, but that's not to detract from how powerful it is. Again, let's swap over and let's go to Google Tasks. Google Tasks sits really nicely on the sidebar of lots of different other Google applications. So if I stop sharing my main window, in fact, I might just share my drive with you. Let's go into my Google Drive. Get that on screen. So in there is where I'm running today's slide deck from, but down here on the side is another place, not even needing to have the tab open. You've got your side dock now where you can move between calendar and Keep. If you want to get that out of the way, the little arrow at the bottom means that it's not cluttering up your screen. But if you want to pop, you can get the sidebar out, and also that you can add other things in on the side of there. So it'll get a pop-up window and you can pick other apps that you want to add in there. But Tasks is there. So I click on Tasks, it will spawn out the side of the screen. And very quickly, I might use this if I've just got a list of things to hack through and I don't want to keep them for longer than a day. So I can add a task in. I've got one there that I need to do English marking, and that's got to be done by 3:30 in the morning tomorrow. Interesting choice of time there. Might make that 3:30 in the afternoon. But if I want to add a task in, I can pop it in there. So it might be meet Mr. Jones, because I've got to meet Mr. Jones. He's a father of one of the children in my class. I'm going to have a meeting with Mr. Jones tomorrow, and I'm going to do that before the end of the day, just before he picks up his son. It's not going to be a repeating event, and it's in there, and it's also going to be in my calendar if I want it. And then when I've met Mr. Jones, I'm simply going to tick it off, and then that will move through to the task completed. There's the way of undoing it there, but I can go and view my tasks that I've got left. Now my completed tasks are tucked away here in the bottom. I can see struck off there as Mr. Jones. It's another app that often gets overlooked, and people that use Keep sometimes don't like to use tasks because they feel it's a duplication. Sometimes people feel, well, actually I don't need everything that Keep offers, so they'll go for task. It's personal preference. They're both there. I do find that both are really useful, but you're probably going to fall down on the side of one or the other rather than using them both at once. Anybody use Task for anything different, or anybody got any insights into using Task that's different to what I've just covered there in the session? As far as what people having to think about that, if I just swap windows again, as far as what you need to be able to demonstrate for you to be able to do in tasks, it's quite minimal in the Google Educator Level 1 exam, but do look at it before you get to the exam scenario. So if I just pop back over to the presentation and slides, you need to be able to show that you can make a list of tasks where you can see how quick and easy it is there. Show how it integrates tasks with Google Calendar, where you can assign a task in the calendar, and that's where you click on your calendar and you're setting up the event. There's a button there to add a task, and it's got the same icon with the pen and the dot. It isn't always a yellow dot. Sometimes it's a white pen or pencil and a white dot. But the icon is universal, and you can also create tasks as a Gmail message as well, and that's just taking a task that you're in, converting it to Gmail. But all of those are quite simple and quite straightforward. I can see that you said there that you don't use it. Again, I would always use Keep over tasks, but I know it's personal preference, and in Google have kept it. I did wonder in the long term whether it might be phased out as Keep has expanded and it's grown in popularity. But at the moment, it's very much there. It's in that side dock for you to bring out and use at any point whenever you see that you need to. So the tasks is something that's quite useful. Now, with all of these options that I've showed you today, whether it's been chat, meet, tasks, and keep, they're all available in all versions of Google Workspace. But before the summer, Google had a rethink of the Workspace platform, and what were absolutely essential tools they wanted to make sure that everybody had, and then what might come into different tiers, where if you're a bit more of a power user, or often it's a differentiation between a primary school and a secondary school, you may need certain extra things like space to store in and so forth. Well, those options can be achieved in higher tiers. So in the free tools, and we'll look at what's in the free tools next, you get everything you've had in the traditional platform, but you've got 3 paid editions now that sit above. So you've got Google Workspace for Education Standard, and that gives you better visibility of the data beyond using things like Google Vault in your Google Workspace. And from an admin side, if you know that you want to be more compliant, you want to know more information as a leadership team about utilizations of classrooms, what individual pupils are doing with their own Google Workspace, then Google Workspace Education for Standard will give you those analysis and analytical tools in there. You've also then got, as the next level up, is what's called the teaching and learning upgrade. I see if anyone's going to upgrade, it's usually to teaching and learning upgrade. It gives you enhanced educator tools, such as accessibility tools. It gives you more functions within Meet. One of the things, the big differences with something like Meet's obviously in the free version, the free edition. But if you want to have certain aspects of recording, then that's only going to be in the paid tiers and not necessarily in the free tiers. So it's thinking about, well, if I just wanted to meet and do live lessons, then fine, I'll stay on the paid version. If I want to have recordings and expanded storage and things like that, then you might want to go to one of the paid versions. The top paid version now is Google Workspace for Education Plus, and that's absolutely everything you could have with the enhanced tools that you get in that platform, but also the analytics and the space. What you get in what's called Education Fundamentals, which is the free version, you get all of the tools that we've covered during these sessions. There's not anything that you're going to get taken out. It's just some of the features in those tools may not be as fully developed or sometimes aren't there at all, but the basics that you need to use to deliver teaching and learning is. One of the other aspects that often encourage people to upgrade is that you've got 100 terabytes. That's a massive amount of space of whole school pooled storage to share. And unless you're starting to use Google Drive or shared drives to store an awful lot of media in the way of video files or audio files, it's going to be perfectly adequate. And for most primary schools in the UK, it will suffice. But if you're going to get into being a secondary and maybe you're keeping coursework in there for media subjects, then sometimes that's another trigger for upgrading. There's also on Google Meet, there's a 60-minute limit on the free version, and the recordings are, they're not quite removed now, but recordings will get taken out of the free fundamentals version. So you would have to have one of the paid tiers to record in a Google Meet. And then there are greater GDPR tools available in those higher tiered versions. And I'm not going to go through all the subtle differences today, but one of the things that you may get asked in the examination is what's one of the things you could achieve in a paid version of Google Meet as opposed to a free version of Google Meet. And I wanted to make sure that we covered that with you in this session because it's not something that's been explicitly articulated before in other training sessions. And it also isn't something that's that easy to go away and find. And as one of the partners that work with Google, it's easier for us just to give you that information on a session like this. So you shouldn't need to know too much about it, but it also might be useful for you as an individual thinking about the needs for the school that you work in and what you might need to do to get some of the features that you're going to depend upon or you've used in the past that have now moved into paid tiers. I would say that a lot of primaries probably won't need to upgrade, but sometimes you might find there's certain things. And Google Meet is one of those core areas that you may need to upgrade. The upgrades aren't massively expensive. I think from memory, it's about a difference between £3 per pupil per year to £6 at the highest from memory. So there's a slight cost to it, but it depends on whether you value those tools that you're going to get out. You may get questions in the exam as to what are the benefits, why would you use Google for education, and it comes back to that linked environment, ease of access, tools that can be depended upon that just work in a browser. It will work from any platform, that pupils can get to it on virtually any device. It's growing in popularity all the time. Certainly during the first half of 21, Chromebooks were one of the best-selling devices. The Chrome users in Chrome OS are expanding all the time, but so are Google Classroom users, and many more schools are adopting it as their platform of choice to get people together online virtually and still offer a rich learning experience or allow just simply for teachers to reach pupils if you can't have them in the class with you. So it's something that you may get come up and you just need to be able to articulate that. And that might come up as a text-based question when you're getting through the Google Level 1 examination. So for today, we've covered a lot of smaller applications, all crammed into one session. And it is a thank you from me, but it's also an opportunity for you to ask me any questions you want and discuss anything you need to. I'm going to stop the recording at this point because there weren't any new comments or any new content I'm going to cover. So I will stop the recording now. But if you want to join me in any of the future sessions, you saw the agenda earlier in the session. You're welcome to come and join me on those. The next one is focused on Google Classroom and how to get the most from Google Classroom. So that's the next immediate session. And then I'll detail the other ones as we go through. So I'm going to end the recording now. Thank you for joining me on the recording. But if you're here on the live session, you're welcome to stay and discuss anything you wish with me.